Chapter 36. A Man and His Dog. We continued to take him on walks with us after Naomi was born, and did our best to keep Ruger occupied, but it was not ideal. Just before Naomi was 7 months old, I thought I would help Chelsea get some rest, so I took Naomi and Ruger for a walk around the lake near our home. I usually never kept Ruger on a leash, but the park ranger had been hounding people who didn't, so I did that day. Naomi was sleeping on my chest, her little legs dangling out of the baby carrier, happy as she could be. We finished our first lap around the lake, and I heard in my spirit that I needed to turn back and head home. I tried to dismiss the thought and justify it away. I thought to myself, Naomi never lets Chelsea rest, and she deserves a longer nap than this. So I walked on. Again, I felt a troubling in my spirit, but I continued to shove it down. The trail around the lake is about 20 feet above the shoreline and 50 feet away from the water. I saw up ahead a woman and two well-muscled men standing by the water, throwing sticks for their 3 pit bulls to retrieve. The dogs were enjoying the game, and just as we went to pass by, one of them looked up and saw us. I felt the intent of his gaze turn from curious to furious and aggressive all at once. He let out a guttural bark and growl as he tore up the embankment towards us. I reached for my weapon, but it was strapped under Naomi and I could not get to my backups. The owner suddenly saw us and screamed, "No!" This alerted the other dogs, who began thrashing their way out of the water towards their packmate. The first of the raging pit bulls was on us in less than 2 seconds. I did my best to turn Naomi away as the dog plowed into the 3 of us. Snarling teeth began to chop at the air as Ruger swung on his harness between the pit bull and myself. Soon his legs got entangled in his leash and he couldn't fight back. I pulled Ruger off the ground, trying to release his strap, but I couldn't get my hands on it. The dog's teeth clacked together as I heard the owner screaming, "Oh God, no, stop it!" Naomi was awake now, and her screams rose above the chaos. For a brief moment, I feared her dangling legs had been bitten, but then she went still and quieted down. I did my best to keep my body between the attacking dogs, but all of a sudden the second pit bull, teeth bared, slammed into us, and we began to stumble around. I saw Ruger step in between us, and the dog's teeth tore into his leg. The smell of animal secretions, fear, and blood was now in the air. The woman on the shoreline just kept screaming, "God, no!" A frenzy of chaos ensued. I used the only weapons I could and began to deliver strikes to the dog with boots, elbows, and leash handles, crashing into ribs, skulls, and spines of the attackers. But then, what sent icy tendrils down my neck was that the dog didn't even seem to mind at all. Suddenly, I saw one of the pit bulls go flying off the ground as an owner grabbed onto it and threw it back down the embankment. Just then, Ruger broke off his fight with the second pit bull, and we tried to run down the other side of the embankment and away from the attack. Before we got a few feet down the side, the third pit bull came barreling down after us. I was finally able to get Ruger's tangled harness released when the second man jumped down and slammed onto his dog, smothering him to the ground. "Run!" he screamed at us, and we did. Sprinting back towards our house, I began to examine Naomi, who was still quiet, and miraculously, she was unharmed. There were streaks of blood and hair all over my legs, and I didn't think any of it came from me. I could see flesh missing from Ruger's leg and hair missing from spots on his chest, back, and face. I left him in the backyard briefly and ran into the house where I woke Chelsea up with one of the worst feelings of her life. Veterinary care was out of the question, as we could hardly afford to eat. And though Ruger's leg took the brunt of the damage, I knew with our care it would eventually heal. And by the time I went back to try to confront the owners, they were long gone. It's probably best I didn't find them. I learned a lot from the excruciating experience, and none of it was pleasant. I learned how dangerous it is to ignore those promptings in our spirit. That gut check out of nowhere should not be overlooked. Since then, we have learned to pay attention and obey the promptings in our spirit anytime our peace is suddenly taken. And we stand upon the word that God is not the author of confusion, but he is the author of peace. Ruger may have saved our lives, but it came at a terrible cost. He would never recover from the attack. Physically, he did, as the puncture wounds closed up, and scars took the places of bloody wounds, like they so often do. After the morning around the lake, Ruger was more aggressive with other dogs, and he got to a point where I had to keep him on a leash on our walks. He was anxious, and the pain from his hip was worse than ever. There were still glimpses of Chicken Wing, my best friend, but they became fewer and fewer still. That is when death came to betray a man and his best friend.